Do you remember why you started card making? Maybe you wanted a creative outlet. Maybe you wanted to meet some new friends. Maybe you thought you were going to save money. Hi everyone, it's Ardith, and in today's video I'm going to be looking at using alphabet dies. I think one of the best things about making cards is that you can personalize them to match the recipient. You can use their favorite colors or themes, and alphabets are a great way to add their name, a special date, and they can be used for personalized birthday cards, graduation cards, anniversary cards, and so much more. Let's get started. I've got two alphabet die sets here, and they're both from Magillian Vance Design. These letters are 1 1/4 inches high, and they're a nice straight text font. They're big enough to be very legible, and you can fit up to 5 letters portrait and 7 letters landscape on an A2 card. And you can fit 9 on a slimline card. There's a set of numbers that is sold separately, and these two sets are great for personalizing birthdays or anniversaries or graduation cards. Then there's the mini headline alphabet and numbers. These little guys are 1/2 inch tall, and you can use them on their own or in combination with the bigger alphabet. They're the same font as headline type, just smaller, and that means these sets will work really well together. The mini set includes the numbers, and it has a very clever design in that the letters are grouped together in 7 dies. This is a nice compromise between having about 40 little dies to try and keep track of, or one big cover plate where you would be cutting every shape every time. One die has the vowels on it. One die has the numbers 1 to 8, the next one has 9 and 0 and some symbols. One has double letters, P's, R's, S's, and T's, so you can easily cut words like happy or merry. This die has the least used letters, and then there's one bigger die with all the rest. I have 3 cards showing how I used these alphabet dies in different ways, along with lots of tips for making it easy to work with them. My first card uses the Delightful Daisy Junior die set to create negative masks or stencils for my background. This card is a shaker card, and it ended up being a little more complicated than I had intended, and I'll show you why as I go through. I started by blending my darker ink through the circular stencil for the center of the flower. I found that doing the center first then made it easier to get the flower stencil spaced properly around the circle rather than doing it the other way around. I used sangria ink and a big blending brush to put the ink down. These brushes are really great for covering a big area quickly. Then I went to try and remove the temporary adhesive from the panel, and I got a big smudge. Oh, I hate that. But it is important to try and get that adhesive up so that when you blend the ink on the next layer, you get smooth coverage. I placed the flower stencil so that it would cover the majority of that ink smudge, and then I blended some B Mine ink through that. I have lots of temporary adhesive on those points between the flower petals because I don't want them lifting as I blend the ink over top. So when I'm finished here, I will need to remove that adhesive from the panel. I love the kind of groovy look this flower has with its big center. So here's the first way I'm going to use the alphabet dies. This is going to be a birthday card for my sister, whose favorite color is pink, and I'll use the larger letter set for the word happy to form my shaker hole. I lined up the letters on my grid work surface, and right away you can see why I thought it was so clever for that smaller alphabet to have doubles of some letters. I only have 1 P, and I need 2 to make the word happy. When this happens, I place another letter that's a similar size, in this case the R, as a placeholder, and then I finish the word. Next, I removed the R, and I used my craft pick to make sure everything was straight and exactly where I wanted it. Then I grabbed some purple tape and I laid it down over top. This turns those 4 dies into 1 die. I placed it over my panel, and I was conscious of where that little bit of a smudge was still visible as I pressed it down, again using that grid on my work surface to be sure that the word was straight. Then I simply ran it through my Gemini Junior, and I removed the tape. I'm not going to use those letters on this project, but I will hold on to them because they can work really well as layers if I want to stack letters up for a future project. Next, it was easy to put the P back into that empty space and run the panel through my die cutting machine again to finish the word. So now my panel is all happy and I'm ready to build my shaker. These letters were really close to the edges of my panel, so I knew I had to make the more complicated edgeless kind of shaker, where the acetate becomes 2 of the walls of the shaker. I trimmed a piece of acetate to the height I wanted and significantly wider than my card front. I put glue onto the back of my happy panel, making sure to get all the little bits coated so they'll stick well to the acetate window. And then I got out my scoreboard to score the acetate. Acetate doesn't really like to be scored, by the way, so you really need to have a firm grip on it. I scored 2 lines about 1.5 inches in from the end and 1/8 of an inch from each other. Even folding the acetate along the scored lines is not that easy, at least not for me, because it's hard to see those score lines. I made sure that the edges of the top layer of the acetate were lined up with the bottom layer so that I at least knew the lines were straight, and I fussed around a bit, but I ended up with what I needed, which is a little wall about 1/8 of an inch high. Then, to save having to measure, I put the panel where it needed to be, and I scored the other end of the acetate at the other edge of the panel. Then I scored it again about 1/8 of an inch away. So now I have the panel backed with acetate for the window, and these 2 built-out flaps that will allow us to have a shaker right up to the edges. I doubled up some foam tape and I cut it into strips before gluing it to the back of the panel. I made another little mistake here because my strips were not quite long enough to go completely from one acetate wall to the other. I ended up filling them in with tiny pieces of foam tape, but that's important. Any little holes here will allow your shaker material to leak out, and that is definitely not what we want. So now for the shaker material itself. I used some seed beads from Pretty Pink Posh, and I chose the pink ones because I thought they matched well. I also thought it would be fun to add in some yellow beads and mix it up a bit. In retrospect, I wish I had chosen something with more contrast, or even just used only the yellow beads. These beads roll everywhere if you spill them, so I used a little spoon to try and keep them under control. I had some success with it, but not total, and in the end I filled up my shaker area with the beads, and I was ready to close it all up. I did that with a panel cut to 4 1/4 by 4 inches, and I placed it down on top of the doubled up foam tape, but leaving those acetate flaps out. Then I put glue on the back and I glued those flaps down, and my shaker is complete. This edgeless shaker idea takes a little bit longer, but it's really a great way to be able to take your shakers right to the edges of your card. So now I had happy and I needed birthday. This time I used the mini headline alphabet, and here's my very best tip for working with it. Some kind of double-sided tape on the back of your panel before you die cut it. I have this huge mama roll that is 4 inches wide, so I can easily cover the back of a panel. Next, just grab the dies you need to make up the word you want to spell and die cut. You'll end up with lots of extra letters, but they're all now stickers and they all stay part of that panel. And anything you don't use, you can just save for next time. And if you need more letters, you can just continue to run them through. And if you don't want white letters for your project, no problem. Color them with Copics right while they're in place. They're far enough apart that you can easily color just the letters you need in the colors you want. I chose yellow to match with the beads in the shaker. I wanted to space out my birthday letters across the happy word on the front panel. I used a ruler to gauge how much space I had. Don't forget that the letters are sticky, which makes them much easier to work with than trying to put liquid glue on these little guys, but it does mean that you have to be careful where you put them before you attach them to your card. I used the non-stick mat from my Ranger Travel glass media mat. It's easy to put the letters down and then pull them up while you're respacing or rearranging them until you have them exactly where you want them. Once they're all spaced fairly evenly across the bottom of that non-stick mat, I used some more purple tape to lift them all up at once. I carefully peeled back the non-stick mat, trying not to move any of the letters, and then I positioned them over my happy flower panel before pressing down and peeling back the purple tape. Off screen, I blended some more pink ink onto the corners, and I added a little ladybug from the Delightful Daisy Jr. set. Although I think the yellow was a nice happy color to add to the card, I wanted more contrast, so I cut the birthday letters again from some dark gray cardstock. I used the same method as before, putting tape on the back of the cardstock, and then I chose the dies I needed. Then I put the gray letters over the yellow ones, offsetting them slightly so it'll look a little bit like a glow coming from behind. To finish this card, I simply adhered the shaker panel to a white card base. This card is pretty special with its shaker feature, and I know my sister will love it since it was made just for her. My next card shows that you can use alphabet dies with other word dies. This is the Grande Greetings Hello die, also from Magillian Vance Design. It's big and scripty and the perfect contrast for the little mini headline letters, which I can use to add to the sentiment. My background is a leftover from a previous project where I used the horizontal pinstripes cover plate and a rainbow of Copic markers. I cut 4 of the Hello die and I used liquid glue to stack them up. You may be wondering why I didn't use an adhesive sheet on these. Like most things in life, the two adhesives have pros and cons. For a larger die cut like this, it's not that difficult to put tiny dots of liquid glue on the back of each die cut without having it all squish out everywhere. Plus, you get that wiggle time where you can move the letters around until they're lined up exactly where you want them. The adhesive sheets don't give you that time. In the end, of course, it's a personal choice, so I would say give them both a try and find out what works best for you. Next, I pulled out my panel with the mini letters cut, and I searched out the letters for friend. I wanted it aligned on the right side of the panel, so I started with the D and I went backwards. Talk about getting all confused about I before E and all that. If you can't remember or if you have a longer message, you can write it down so that your backwards spelling doesn't go wrong. If you want the word placed in the center, then I would suggest placing the center letter first, or the center 2 letters if you have an even number of letters, and then building out from there. Just remember that an I takes up less space than the rest of the letters. You could even do what I did for the shaker card and place the letters down on that non-stick mat and pick them up with the purple tape. So there's lots of ways to do this, and again, it's up to you to find what's best for you. To finish this card, I adhered the rainbow panel to a white card base and then added some flamingo jewels from Pretty Pink Posh for some sparkle. Before I get to the next card, I just want to quickly show you that if you're die cutting the letters with the tape on the back, and some of them actually stay in the die rather than on the panel, it's really easy to get your pokey tool out and just push it back onto the release paper so that it's ready to use next time you are. This time I was cutting my nephew's name, Andy, and 16, which is the age he's turning. I wanted to stack the letters this time, so I cut them more than once, and I very quickly figured out that on my second pass through, some of the letters didn't have tape on the back. As I said earlier, when I work with the small numbers, I find it easier if they're already sticky, but of course it's not the end of the world to have to add some liquid glue, as I will have to here. I stacked 2 layers of my Andy letters from the mini alphabet and the 16 from the headline numbers set. I'm only doing 2 layers because I'm going to do something fun to the top, which is inspired by my friend Carly. I got out the non-stick mat for the letters that had double-sided tape on the back, but for the A and the Y, which were not sticky on the back, I used another Carly trick, and I folded back a loop of purple tape. That gave me a place where the letters could be held in place while I covered everything with the Nouveau Crystal glaze. I like this glaze. It's a little runnier than others I've tried in the past, so I do need to be careful with it, but it doesn't seem to clog up the nozzle, so that makes me happy. After I put a generous coating all over the letters, I took a little pinch, just a little pinch of the Studio Katia Chunky Glitter, and I sprinkled it over top, trying to be sure I had it evenly spaced. Fast forward to the next morning, and here are the letters attached to a circle of gray cardstock. Now for my background. I'm going to use a die cut from the stitched plaid cover plate as a stencil. Check it out. If I mask down each side so there's only a strip of that plaid going down the center of my white panel, and if I blend the dark gray ink so that it's lighter on the edges and darker in the center, then the result looks like a tire tread. Do you see it, or am I off my rocker? In Ontario, 16 is the age where you can start the process of getting your driver's license, and I know my nephew has been waiting for this day for a long time. To finish this card, I popped up the Personalize focal point and I added a black mat. The glitter is sparkly but not too feminine, especially since it's the only kind of embellishment on this simple card. There are so many ways to be creative with alphabets and numbers. Whether you stack them up, make them into a shaker, use them by themselves, or as part of a larger sentiment, alphabet dies are one of our most versatile crafting tools. And however you use them, they're sure to add something special to your projects. Do you personalize your cards for your recipients? If so, how do you do it? Let me know in the comments below. I've got a link to my supply list in the description below and also on my blog. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.